Hi, I'm Tim Dineen, the die guy with Food Extrusion Dies. This is Die Talks episode 6, where we're going to be briefly discussing metallurgy, knives, and surface finishes of your dies and how they all work together. So, let's get at it. Episode number 6, Die Talks. Let's get at this. So, the first talking point we have on this is microsurfacing. What is microsurfacing? So, okay, let's say you buy an extrusion die and you get it back and it looks beautiful, or you have it resurfaced on the face and it looks nice. You know, there's all these fancy little marks going across there from the surface grind that look really fine and really beautiful, and it's totally flat. So what that actually is, if you can see those marks on there, and especially you can, run your fingers one way over it and then run it another way, and if you feel it at all, what you actually have there, even though it is beautiful, that is a microfile. So you're going to put a brand new knife on that, and you're going to file that knife down. You're not going to see it happening because it's actually happening microscopically, but it is going to start galling. And then once it starts galling, then it's going to start wearing. And once it starts wearing, a couple dies here, you're going to see, and you're going to get these, grooves going all the way around there because you've created galling and started that whole process happening. So micro surfacing, we're going to leave that little blip in there. Micro surfacing is where we take the surface and we remove all those marks, and we polish those out and sand those out so that you can drag your fingers over it and not feel it any way, because there is no microfile. So basically what it is the top of that surface, has these lines, your micro surface grinding on there. If you can take your thing and it feels that way, but if you run it the opposite way, and you feel anything at all, you have a microfile. We all know what's going to happen when you run a file across something. So basically you're running a file across this knife, which is inherently softer. That's exactly what you've created. You have a file. And it's going to slowly wear that file down, as files do, but it's going to wear it down into your knife, and it's going to start that process. Once you start galling, and I will probably say this a couple times in this video, once you have started something galling and two metals meshing with each other, you will not undo that. All your knives will last less because you already have that happening in your die. Even if you don't see it in your die, it is there. It's microscopically there. And that's why it's important to never start with that process. Never start with a die that you can feel something on there at all. It's a microfile. We don't send any dies out that are like that at all. Everything that leaves our shop is at least microsurfaced. Everything. So the next thing we're talking about, micropolishing. That's one step above microsurfacing. Microsurfacing is where we get all the grinding marks out of there and you can't feel anything. We've created a totally flat, smooth surface and not a surface ground file. So micropolishing is a different thing. After we microsurface it, we actually take and get all those marks out and we polish it basically to a mirror. I'm going to lift this die up so you can see what happens. So when a knife runs over our micro polished surface, as you can see on here how that's a mirror right there. So you can see the knife path that happened. Let's see if I can hold this right across here. It actually polished it even more. Rather than wearing and galling, because we did not have that surface there and we didn't start that galling process, it actually kept smoothing itself. Now, can you take a knife and pound it in there and destroy any surface that's on there? Yes. But if you treat this right and you do that, you will create a surface that keeps getting smooth and polishing. And what's going to happen? Your knives aren't going to wear down as much because they're running smooth on these surfaces, just like a bearing should. If you start with a surface, like we talked about, that isn't been micro-surfaced and it has a surface ground finish, as every other die maker does, if you start with that, you are starting with a file. And there's no way you're going to improve from that. So that is micro-polishing. That is the next step after micro-surfacing, where we actually polish the face of the die to a mirror quality. So we're going to briefly talk about metallurgy a little bit. And when I mean briefly, I mean really briefly. We're going to talk about the differences between a powdered metal substrate and standard material in steel. So basically what happens with that is standard materials in steels, D2, H13, all those type of things, they have a molecular size that's a lot larger than powdered metal engineered steel. And what that does is those are all mixed together, you know, your mollies, your iron, and all that stuff, and then it's molded out, and it makes a material that when you microscopically look at it, there are still granulars in there that are large in size. And what happens is those start to break off when knives are coming there. I know it's hard to believe. It was actually hard for me to believe too, but when you can look at things microscopically and in a metallurgy way, that's what's actually happening. So your powder metal, they are actually usually, I think, 500 times smaller, and don't quote me on that number, of granulars before they're actually molded and melted together. That makes your molecular structure a lot tighter, which also means your steel doesn't have to be as hard. You don't have to be in the 60 Rockwell, which makes it brittle and able to crack. You can be in the 50s Rockwell, and your knives run over the top of it smoother. You don't have, large chunks breaking off. And when I say large chunks, I mean microscopically large chunks, not actually chunks breaking off the die. But in metallurgy, that's exactly what this looks like. The T metals that Food Extrusion Dies uses are a lot stronger and tougher, and the wearability is 6 to 10 times longer. But again, that's our really brief metallurgy talk. About the differences in metals and microscopically what's going on when your knives hit on the surface of those. Okay, the last subject we're going to talk about, and again, really briefly, we're going to talk about knives and the sharpening edge on knives. So most places that you might have your knives manufactured from, I'm going to say most, probably all, each one of these knives are going to be ground a couple of them at a time, maybe 6 or a dozen. Somebody's grinding them, they're taking them off, they're putting another set on there. It's usually not under a water bath. They may get a little hot. And again, when you're only doing a couple knives at a time, they can look beautiful, but they may not be to the process of like a razor blade type of knife or how that is. And again, the surface of that sharpen on there versus the surface on our dies we talked about with being able to feel that surface grind on one side of everything, that's the same way. If your knives are going over that or your knife metallurgically is not smooth on there, then that makes all the difference in the beginning and you'll never get out of that galling phase. So all the knives that we make in Food Extrusion Dies, our knife material is made in a razor blade sharpening plant. So that is sharpened, thousands of feet at a time. So you got to understand the manufacturing process involved in that. If you're on a guy on a little surface grinder and you're grinding a couple knives at a time versus a process that's doing thousands of feet at a time, which one's going to be a nicer surface? Which one's going to be a more precision sharpen on there? Even if you can't see the difference, which one's going to be the better one? The one that has that thousands of feet that's done similar as a razor blade sharpening manufacturing plant. So that's the difference between our knives and our die material and our steels, and that's why we're the best. That's what we've been working at for 20 years is continuous improvement, and we're continuously improving. In fact, we're actually working on 2 other types of steels that we're going to be working on that are going to be more of a razor blade type of material and a hardened stainless material. So those are the 2 that will be coming up probably towards the end of 2026. And that right there is the end of our Die Talks video number 6. And don't forget, be the solution. Food Extrusion Dies.
Food Extrusion Dies, supplying extrusion dies and knives for snack food, cereal, pet food manufacturers globally.